it's Dr. Parikh, and we're on Module 5, Violence and Trauma. So a couple things to start out. First of all, this is a good time where we're over halfway through the course. It's a good time to remember the limits of what we're talking about. The readings and video I've chosen are very, very heavily focused on U.S. culture. And that's something I made an intentional choice about, that based on the scope of the course, the level of the course, I would focus on the U.S. I also was very intentional because it's easy when we when we talk about discrimination, sexism, things like that, and we start talking about a global stage, it's really easy to get distracted by the unfamiliar types of trauma or discrimination and to kind of ignore the homegrown type. So typically what we're used to is not as repugnant to us as something that's new. And so I didn't want us to get too distracted by talking about other places and other types of discrimination and not recognize what is present in the US, which is, where this course is based. I also think it's just hard to do justice to everything, so I'd rather give a lot of depth to gender and particularly issues of women and girls in the US than to give a little bit to a lot of places and kind of come out not being sure what you've been exposed to. But it's important to remember that there is a whole other piece of the experience outside the US. Just like there's a lot of critiques of feminism for focusing on the needs of well-educated, often wealthy, or at least middle and upper middle class white women, and ignoring lower income or women of color. I think that we have to be very aware of focusing on issues of women in the US and not also advocating for women in other places. So that's just kind of a blanket statement that's good to keep in mind. I think I talk about it in the beginning, but I want to mention it again here. Piece number 2, this week's a downer. It's just incredibly heavy, and a lot of prepping this course has been very heavy for me, but I think this week for me by far is the heaviest. So I strongly encourage that you pick some time to use for self-care, and that you be willing to lean into each other in the check-ins to talk about how these things are affecting you in a more personal way, but that you also be careful what you disclose and also try to avoid sharing things that might be very difficult for other class members to also have added on. And I'm towing a very careful line here because I also certainly don't want to say that people who have experienced violence or trauma or have loved ones who have experienced violence and trauma shouldn't talk about that. But I think if you do choose to disclose things about yourself or people you love, for one, if it's not yourself, be very careful and to be vague and non-identifying and let them keep control of their story. If it is you, be careful how much you disclose in terms of what you might regret, but also just in general, be kind of respectful of the amount of details and how it may be difficult. Your classmates may also have their own histories of trauma. So just be mindful of how much you share, the detail that you share. And really do, have in mind people you can talk with about things. Distraction activities. That's one of the things I really like about board games. It's a way to kind of immerse into another world. I also use knitting, crochet, cross stitch, things like that when I want to distance a little bit. Or, just fun TV that's light and silly, or people. So keep in mind ways to cope. This is also a good time to remind you that in the syllabus, I mentioned that this topic in particular may touch on either old wounds that you thought you had handled, or may open up new wounds that you didn't realize were wounds that needed taken care of. So there's counseling services available on campus. There's also a lot of different crisis lines. I include a few. Let me see. I think I might have some of this stuff here in Blackboard. I forget. Sometimes I remember to do a little, so counseling resources. So this link takes you, so this is probably, so I just kind of copied what I have in my syllabus. And there's, if you click the web link itself, it takes you right to the counseling services information. It's in the Newman Center. It's kind of right, it's upstairs. It's in with the health services. And so there's also the New Jersey Hope Line, and you can find all sorts of other helplines to call. There's numbers you can text. There are numbers specific. There are hotlines specifically dedicated to sort of women crisis and trauma. So there's a lot of resources out there. And be aware you may need them this week, even if you're usually doing pretty okay. And even if you have not personally experienced violence and trauma in your life, it's just a heavy week. And I purposely stuck it in the middle because I did not want to end on this note. I really, really didn't. Yeah. So the first one is a chapter in the book that talks about online gender harassment, revenge porn, non-consensual pornography, sextortion, and other terrifying topics that are as bad as they sound. So that's where we start this week. And there's a lot of kind of definitions of different way and descriptions of both ways that these things can be used to harass and harm women, but also how difficult it can be to prosecute. And I believe we already did Zoe and the Trolls. Yeah, we did that when we talked about kind of career issues, but a lot of those same issues will come up in this reading. This module focuses a lot on videos. Most of them are fairly short, but there's a lot of them, so keep that in mind as you're planning your time this week. So the first several videos talk about domestic violence, why sort of what makes it difficult for victims to leave, how we can understand the experience of being a domestic violence victim. Terminology switches a little bit. I usually prefer intimate partner violence. It is to me the most kind of neutral term, but domestic violence also gets used quite a bit, and in this class, we're focused on the experience of women, but I also do want to make it clear women are most likely to be victims of violence, or more likely than men to be victims of violence. But men can also be victims of violence, and there are particular issues for individuals who are trans or gender fluid. They are at higher risk to be victims of violence and probably have a lot less security in believing that going to the police is going to be helpful for them. So the first several videos deal with intimate partner violence, the power and control wheel. Then we go into a video that talks about rape culture and what that means, sort of how American culture normalizes beliefs that kind of underlie rape. It fits for me with a lot of the early videos we watched about advertisements that really portray, some of them that that essentially portray women as murder victims, being ogled by men. And that's just sort of a normal thing, or that's like a cool, edgy advertisement. And again, that's kind of saying it's okay, that it's not that bad. Then it goes into a video thinking about so there's a big issue where very, very few rapes get reported, and very, very few rapes that are reported and prosecuted end in a conviction. And so this video kind of talks about some of those complexities and what we could do to make things easier and more supportive for rape survivors. Rape victim versus survivor is another thing. I typically prefer the term survivor, but a lot of people still do. A lot of people who I think are, would know, whose opinions I respect, use the term victim. Then there's a video that talks about porn, specifically around violence, and some of the, especially the Hot Girls Wanted documentary by Rashida Jones. We just watched an interview with her, but she touches a little, and I think there's been a lot of pointing to the porn industry and the normalizing of non-consensual sex and particularly violent sex, demeaning sex. And so there's some talk about how viewing, kind of learning about sex through these types of porn really really sets people up for unhealthy sex habits and behaviors. Then there's a few videos and videos focused on Me Too. So there was, I had something earlier that I felt was very much career focused. So try to think back to that as you're also thinking about these issues with Me Too. Then we talk about a few specific groups. So we talk about violence against trans individuals and particularly murder. And this one gets even more detailed. Specifically, trans women of color are at very high risk for murders, and the reported murder rates are scary. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that the actual rates are probably higher than what's reported, because you have to be identified as trans. Somebody has to make the decision to count you as trans and to count it as a murder. And then the last two videos talk about Native American women, Indigenous women, and there's a big push right now to recognize the experiences of violence against women against Native American women populations, and to recognize there are a lot of women who just have gone missing, and there's not a lot of response to that. So for the work I went through between videos and made it so that it goes media report, topical post, and then whatever is different for that week. For my brain, that's just a little easier to think of it as kind of going from easiest to hardest and to go with all of the routine stuff and then the new thing that's added on. So we'll look at, we'll go back to the discussion and we'll look down. This is week 5. So you've got check-in, media report, topical post, and then this is, I believe, exactly the same as last week. You are doing a new paragraph. So you're really starting to fill in your paper at this point. I'm really forcing you to do it a little bit at a time. But it really, I think it's a way to have excellent discussion and critical thinking that contributes toward a bigger assignment that you're doing. And then at the end of the week, so you have your responses on Saturday like usual, you've got your quiz on Sunday like usual, but we also have your second draft of your autobiography. So let me pull that up. So here under course content, it's linked under the weekly modules. All of this stuff is linked by module. But if you go down to the autobiography, that's the way that's easier for me to get it. So 1 and 2, and I kind of have just the same description for both because I want you to understand how they fit together. So in the first week of class, the module 1, you drafted an autobiography. And that was meant to be kind of a fresh take. It was meant, oh, the sun's coming and doing things again. So it was meant to really be a very fresh take before you got exposed to a lot of the theories and things from this class. And it also just breaks things up over time. So you've got a draft and then a final paper. So the autobiography should focus on course concepts such as gender identity, beliefs about women and girls, understanding of gender roles, participation in media, and understanding of intersexuality. So for your draft, you didn't need sources. For this revision, I want to see you going in and adding depth and commentary to what you wrote the first time. So you'll need to edit it some to kind of make it all blend together. It's somewhere between a rewrite and just going in and adding things. So the final paper, you need at least 5 sources. They can all be from the course. So it can all be videos and readings from this course. You could also use the same article you're using for your critical analysis paper. I'm fine with that. You can also go out and find more articles. I'm not going to tell you can't, but you don't need to. When I say sources, 5 sources, just to clarify, you might have 2 or 3 citations of the same source in your paper. That still just counts as one source. So I don't just want you to cite something 5 times. I want you to cite 5 different things in your paper. So your final paper needs citations and a reference page with at least 3 sources. So the body of the text, not your title page or anything like that, should be about 3 to 6 pages. There's some flexibility. If you go a little longer than that, that's fine. I want the second version to be a professional writing, so make sure you take a little more time to edit. I want it to flow and make sense. I want you to kind of try to draw out more of some main points and conclusions. Make sure you're using good topic sentences. And I want you to really highlight the roles of the sources in what you're writing about. Let's peek in at the rubrics. So every assignment should have rubrics set up already. This one does not. I thought I did. I still need to do that. Let's see if the first one has a rubric. I usually do it as I set things up, but I might have, I was in a hurry. So check before, when I create a rubric, I typically look at my description and really use that as my guide. And I will have those up before your assignments are due. So you can look through those, and you can always contact me with questions. But I really try to make things as measurable as possible. So for example, for the final paper, I'm certainly going to have something that says, like, you have 5 sources. Are the citations correct? Is the reference list correct? Are they used in a meaningful way? And then I'm also going to check, if I tell you that I want it to be in APA style, I'm going to have something that's looking at, is it an APA style? For this, I don't think you need an abstract, but if you feel more comfortable with one, you can. But I do want a title page and a title page for both and a reference page for this second one. Yeah, that's week 5. Thanks. Bye.